Welcome back to Niners Nightly. Kyle Shanahan there. I don't know if it feels like the first time. It maybe feels like the sixth time that the Niners lost to the Chiefs, but hopefully they can turn things around Sunday night with the Cowboys rolling in here. Larry Krueger with you on Niners Nightly. We go to the guest line, the UMA guest line for our good friend John Dickinson. What's up, JD? How are you, man?
Hey, Larry, what's going on, man? Good to be with you. Starting our Warriors coverage, but always staying connected to everything that's going on with the 49ers, and going to be at Levi's on Sunday. And, man, massive, massive game for the 49ers on Sunday. One they really have to get. If they can, it will feel like, all right, you get to the middle of the year, you're 500, take a deep breath, try to get healthier at the bye, trade deadline to follow, and things can be back on track relatively quickly. But wow, if this thing goes the other direction with as dominant as the Niners have been against the Cowboys recently, then I think at that point it really does turn into Panic Central in the Bay Area.
You know, I'm in the locker room today, and I'm listening to George Kittle, and I'm listening to Trent Williams. And Trent Williams a couple times said, hey, man, it's a really long year. And I'm thinking to myself, hey, you know, it's a really long year, but if you lose this game, it may not be a really long year. You know, I mean, it's like we're getting to the nitty-gritty
it's getting
right
shorter
now.
Quick.
Yeah, I mean, this really long year, I mean, do the Niners need to dial up the urgency? I mean, I realize that they're in a bad division, and that kind of dials the urgency down because we can say this is must win, but the reality is all you got to do to make this somewhat of a successful year is outrun the lowly Cardinals, Rams, and Seahawks to the playoffs in the NFC West, and then anything can happen in the playoffs. I mean, you already are kind of almost guaranteed to have to venture out on the road, right? So I don't know. How do you see their situation? Because I'll say this, JD, from being in their locker room, it doesn't feel like they feel like this is dire or that this is like supreme urgency. That's not the vibe I got today at all.
I think the urgency, though, will be there at 5:20 on Sunday night. I think they know that the path is much, much easier if they can win this game, get to 4-4, and not have to make up 2 games under 500 just to get back. You know, that's the thing. You get more than 1 game under, and it takes you, you know, if the Niners were to lose, I mean, it would take them, you'd have the bye. They'd have to beat Tampa and Seattle just to get back to 500. So the next time they'd be 500 would be almost a full month from now on the calendar, and then it would be getting late. So I do think, look, this team's been through it. A lot of the guys in that locker room have been through just 2 years ago being in the same spot where they were 3-4. And then they won 10 in a row to close out the regular season, and they won 2 playoff games, and they went to the NFC Championship game in Philadelphia before Brock Purdy got hurt, and they got blown out in that game. So 12 straight wins from 3-4. The year before that, they were 3-5 in the middle of the year and finished 7-2, won 2 playoff games, and then ultimately lost in the NFC Championship game. So I do think, even though there is some urgency, and I think we're going to see that on the field Sunday night, I think there are enough players in the 49er locker room and on the coaching staff led by Kyle Shanahan who do know that as bad as it kind of looks right now, they're still very much in the race, and they have proven in the Shanahan era that they can do a massive midseason overhaul and get on a run that not only gets them in, but gets him in and then puts him back in an NFC title game, a step away from the Super Bowl. So, I don't think they're going to downplay it when they hit the field. But to your point, I mean, they really, as long as they beat Seattle the next time they play Seattle, and I know the Rams are playing the Vikings right now, and that game's tied just as I checked, and Arizona got another win and all that. But I feel like this is a division, Larry, that could be won 9-8. If it's the right 9-8, meaning you maybe beat Seattle again and you make sure you handle business against the Rams and Cardinals in the next 2 matchups head-to-head after the Niners dropped the first 2, you'd still be 9-8 and maybe 4-2 in the division, even if you struggle in some of those other games. So the pathway is clearly there, but the Niners are going to have to get it going and get healthy and get on a run here at some point if they're going to reach their true expectation, which is getting back to a Super Bowl and having a chance to win that Lombardi.
Let's talk about the Niners on the the offensive side of the ball. They're eighth in points per game. They average almost 26 a game, 25.7 a game. If you look at yards, they're third in total offense. They're seventh in rush offense, fourth in passing offense. They're number one in the NFL in time of possession. They're holding the ball for 32 minutes and 47 seconds on average, and that's the best mark in the league. And yet some people have said, Kyle Shanahan's offense has regressed. Kyle Shanahan offense can't handle man-to-man coverage. Brock Purdy's numbers are pretty startling when you look at them, what his completion percentage is versus man versus zone. Versus zone defense, he's got a 74% completion percentage. That's sixth best in the NFL. Against man, it drops from 74% to 41%. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, that has been a trend in the early part of his career, and it was something that I think the Chiefs really put on blast in the Super Bowl, and I think other teams have followed suit. And I think it's not just it's not just indicative of Purdy, but I think it's indicative of the 49ers offensive scheme as a whole, and I think it's also indicative of the 49er receivers and how their perceived talents across the league. I mean, if you're comfortable playing man against the 49ers, even if you don't regularly play man maybe against other teams in other matchups, it tells you that you think that you can hold your own in those matchups against the receivers, and it then becomes it's a timing issue, it's a separation issue. I mean, I think it also takes away, Larry, some of those layered throws, right? When a team's in zone and you kind of know where the linebacker's going to be and you know where the safety's going to be, rough, like you can run your route to a spot. And how good has Brock Purdy been at throwing to those open spaces where the ball just kind of hangs there, and at times we're looking at each other in the press box like, oh, where is that going? Oh, that's hit somebody in stride, first down, or hit somebody in stride, big gain. And I think when you go man, assuming you have the talent enough to do it, I think it throws off the timing of everything, and I think that is what's led to a differing level of success. And then the Niners start losing playmakers like Christian McCaffrey and Brandon Ayuk now down for the year, and Debo's banged up, and Kittle's banged up, and I think it even leads to teams really wanting to attack it that way. So I don't know that it's indicative of Purdy specifically, although he gets credit for the good and the bad. He's the quarterback, and if you don't complete passes, that percentage goes down. But I think it's really the whole offensive system, and I think it's on the receivers as much as it is the quarterback.
I just think that he's an expert thrower of the football on the anticipatory throws. I mean, he's just a really good anticipatory thrower. He knows the coverages, and he knows where the soft spots are. And he's for a young quarterback, I think this is one of the best I've ever seen at understanding how to lead his receivers into the void of a defense, as opposed to, I mean, think about this. All those years you watched Jimmy Garoppolo, how many times did Jimmy get his receivers just absolutely detonated on? And then picture Brock Purdy. When was the last time you saw Brock Purdy, throw a bunch of passes and all of a sudden his receivers are getting destroyed? Now, Ayuk got destroyed on a tough hit, but that was just a random. I mean, that just happened to put the helmet at the right spot or the wrong spot, I should say, but a destructive spot. But I don't think that was necessarily led by Purdy. Where Jimmy, I felt like, led his guys into harm's way a ton just because he was so desperate to make a play. Brock seems like he throws guys open and leads them into the void of the defense. But if you play man coverage, and he's got to put it not in the void, but actually on the receiver, it kind of highlights the accuracy. He's normally very, very accurate, but it seems like he struggles with his accuracy in those situations.
Yeah, no, and again, I think some of it is just the rhythm of the entire offense. But again, it comes down to you got to figure it out, and you got to come up with game plans that can that can basically take advantage of the way that the defense is playing you. If they're going to go one way against you, then it's got to leave you vulnerable in other ways. And I think that's where, as much as statistically the 49ers offense, and you read all the stats, statistically it is sound. They just haven't gotten enough points in the red zone consistently enough when they've been down there. And then there have been too many turnovers, I think, as well, just across the board, and too many empty, just too many short possessions too. As much as I know they lead the league in time of possession, but even in leading the league in time of possession, you look at the beginning of that Chiefs game, and it's boom, 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 and it's not complimentary football, right? I mean, they're going 3 and out multiple times, and they're basically wasting the fact that their defense came out really revved up and really playing well. And that's the part that I always come back to, Larry, is the complimentary football. And I know that sounds cliche, or it's, generic, right? We're talking in generalities with complimentary football, and it's coach speak and all that. But if your defense comes out and is on the Chiefs multiple possessions early in the game, knowing that your defense is not quite as good as it used to be and probably won't be able to do that for as much of a full game as they used to be able to do it, if you're the Niner offense, you got to take advantage of that. You got to go score. You got to be up 10-0, 13-0, 17-0 when you get those multiple stops, and they haven't been able to do that. And then teams will settle in against their defense, which is not quite as good. The Niners will get the offense going, but then it's either a back-and-forth game in some of these, or the Niners are finding themselves where they have some leads that have gotten away because the opposition, is able to get their offense rolling, and the Niners essentially haven't made the most of when they have played quality offense and gotten those stops. There have been just too many games where they're up 10, it probably should be 17-20, and if it's 17-20, they're winning the game, and then we're having a different conversation about the whole thing.
Let's talk about the trade deadline. It's approaching. November the 5th at 1 p.m. Pacific is the official deadline. ESPN metrics give the Niners about a 44.5% chance of making the playoffs. To me, it seems like a higher chance than that, but whatever they're looking at. You could make an argument that they have needs in a lot of spots: wide receiver, running back, defensive end, safety with the injury to Talanoa Hufanga maybe being serious, maybe linebacker with Campbell struggling and some young players there. What do you think? What would you do? What would you want to do? I've got a real defined idea of what I think they need to get done at the deadline. But what do you think, JD? What's the priority? What's the need?
Well, I do think they need a wide receiver now with Ayuk down, and that's something that I wouldn't have necessarily put on the list before that injury, especially with Ricky Pearsall coming back into the fold quicker than anybody had expected. So all of the talk about a receiver, I do think they need to look to get another receiver into the mix on the offensive side of the ball. That would be it for me on the offensive side of the ball. I think defense is really where they need to look. If they can get a defensive tackle, I would be open to that. If they can get a linebacker that gives them a little insurance in this interim time before Dre Greenlaw comes back, it looks like Greenlaw is more targeted toward end of November, December, as opposed to in the next couple of weeks. And so, I just don't think, and we've talked about it all year, I just don't think the 49ers have a single quality linebacker on their roster other than Fred Warner, who's an all-pro and an all-time great. But you cannot only have one quality linebacker on your entire depth chart. So if you can go get a linebacker, knowing that you're going to get Greenlaw back, but also not just putting it, you can't put it all on Dre Greenlaw to look like the Dre Greenlaw that he's been throughout the course of his career. So I think linebacker would be one thing. And then less so, I think, would be safety, just because of, Hufanga might be coming back. I like where they're at corner. Even if Mooney Ward's having a somewhat of a down year, I think they've got enough at corner. But maybe looking and going and getting a safety. I think that's probably down my list though now with the wide receiver popping in. So I would almost go wide receiver, linebacker, defensive tackle if I had to rank the positions to try and go get things done, and teams don't really do that, right? Like teams don't go make 3 moves. Like this isn't Major League Baseball where you go get a reliever and a shortstop and a right fielder, right. You kind of have to pick one and go all in on it and make sure you get the right player at that position, and then figure the rest of it out with your depth and internal development.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to make trades in the NFL. It's hard to bank on any trades. I will say this. I mean, Lynch himself has kind of popularized the thing since he's been here in San Francisco, because the Niners have been active and the Niners have been successful, and it's a copycat league. So if you make good trades and you wind up, in the NFC championship game or Super Bowl every year, people start going, well, maybe we ought to make a trade. Maybe we ought to add to our mix. Teams have been very passive going back for decades as far as the trade deadline. It was a non-entity. It's not, they're like the NFL trade deadline. There's no special. There's no NFL.com lead up. There's nothing, right? Because there's just never that many trades. But there have been more in recent days, and obviously now with Amari Cooper in Buffalo, Devontae moving to the Jets, there's a lot of rumors out there. I look at the Niners and say, okay, forget about this year for a second. Let's talk about next year. Debo's probably not going to be here. I mean, that's just probably. They might be able to figure out a way to do it. Jennings is going to be here, but Jennings is not a burner. And Jennings, by the way, has got a hip pointer, I believe, and I don't know. He's not going to play this weekend, and who knows when he'll play. Sounds like maybe not till after the bye. But like next year, what would you have? You're not going to have Ayuk, because Ayuk's injury is, the rehab's going to keep him out probably until Thanksgiving of next year, you would think. So you're not going to have Ayuk. You may not have Debo. So what are you going to have? You're going to have JJ. You're going to have, Pearsall, who's not a burner. You got Cowing, who's quick, but is he a starting caliber wide receiver? The guy that I would try to get, and I would offer a first-round pick to the Jets if they would take it, is Garrett Wilson. And why do you say, would you trade a first-round pick? Yeah, because Garrett Wilson he's a great route runner who also runs in the 4.3s. He could easily be your best wide receiver, including everybody, as soon as next year. So and I don't know, there's all kinds of rumors out there. There's some rumors that there's a number of teams are calling the Jets and Joe Douglas asking for Garrett Wilson. There's also talk that, they don't want to move him. I'm sure they don't want to move him. But I mean, if a team like the Jets, they've got Aaron Rodgers. They got to get their quarterback of the future. He's not on the roster. How do you do that? You get a bunch of number ones. Well, you know what? Give them a 1. I'd give them a 1 and a 3 and a 5 or whatever and say, give me Garrett Wilson. At least I get a young, fast, great route running guy with 4.3 speed who complements my slower receivers going forward and gives me a dynamic playmaker that I can lean on, not just this year, but next year. So that's the guy I'd want to get. But either way, if the 49ers do add a wide receiver, they got to add a fast wide receiver, because Ayuk does run a lot of their deep routes, and he's the guy they really need to replace.
Yeah, I mean, tell Kyle Shanahan that, right? I mean, he hasn't really gone for the fast, the speed. Like, he doesn't tend to view it as, I've got my possession guy and I've got my burner and I'm going to let my burner run over the top and clear it out for everybody. Like, he hasn't really had a lot of those guys. I think the Garrett Wilson idea is interesting. I do think they probably should be open to looking at somebody who's under contract for next year, for those reasons that you mentioned. The fact that Debo, in all likelihood, isn't going to be around, and Ayuk at best is going to be somebody that maybe can return mid-season. You really can't count, unfortunately, on a lot from Brandon Ayuk in 2025. Maybe a half year. I mean, in a sad way, it's almost as if he's going to have to take 25 just to get back and comfortable. And you really almost can't evaluate where he truly is until 2026, which just makes the whole injury all the more just crushing for everybody involved, when you're basically looking at what amounts to like 22 months on the calendar from where we are right now to before you truly can look at Brandon Ayuk again and say, oh, hey, is this guy a productive wide receiver in the NFL again? I mean, it's just really crushing. So I wouldn't disagree with your idea to try to get somebody that's under contract and for at least another year, because again, I'm a believer in in having that built-in depth where you're not putting too much on the guys that you know you're going to have healthy and back for the next year.
I'd love a defensive end as well. If I could get a defensive end of any kind, the guy who's super intriguing and who's a true difference maker, and there's talk that Cleveland's going to shake everything up, is Myles Garrett. Now, I can't imagine they're going to trade Myles Garrett, but you guys got to remember here that Cleveland just traded for Deshaun Watson and gave him that massive contract. Now he's hurt. They got no way out of that contract. From what I'm hearing, they're going to sell off a bunch of players, whether it be at the trade deadline or in the offseason. And if you look at Cleveland, Elijah Moore is a receiver they have who runs in the 4-3s. If the Niners needed another running back, they've got Pierre Strong. They've got Deontay Foreman. If you need a corner, they got Greg Newsome. If you need a defensive end that's cheap, maybe Zadarius Smith. If you want to go, for the big name, maybe Myles Garrett. Cleveland's got some players there. If a guy like Garrett was on the table, that's another guy that would make me part with my number one pick. I don't know. I don't know how you view the 49ers situation, but it seems like I don't believe that. A lot of people say they're an old team and their window's closing. I don't know if their window's closing. Shanahan's a relatively young man. Lynch is not going anywhere. Purdy's 24 years old. They've got a lot of young talent on their roster. I don't see their window as closing. Like they're not going to be a contender next year. But I do see that they have to be in go-for-it mode because they do have Trent Williams and George Kittle and Nick Bosa and all these great players that are, in the prime of their career or in the twilight of their career in some cases. I don't think they can, and they're in a bad division. So it's like, you know what? Go for it, being more of a go-for-it mode. One other question I got to ask you before we get out of here, and that is, there's a great article up at Niners Nation right now that quotes an article written by Mike Sando of The Athletic about the possibility of the Niners trading Brock Purdy. And when I saw this, I was like, what? What? No. And I still kind of feel that way. But this is per Sando. An NFL executive told him the 49ers, quote, need to make a decision about whether they should just be moving on from this older core and building around Brock Purdy, or do they trade Brock Purdy, get stuff for him, and go with a cheaper option at quarterback. The executive cited a logic that's been a favorite of roster building analysts for years. I don't know. What do you think? What? You're just going to try to exist on rookie quarterbacks on rookie deals and just have this this every 2 or 3 year quarterback turnover to make sure that you got a quarterback on a rookie deal. It seems like a really risky way to go, and it seems like, do you realize how good of a player Brock Purdy is? You realize what level of a risk it would be to trade him at this point?
Well, that's the tear it down to the studs move. If you're gonna trade Brock Purdy for a haul basically, then that's the tear it down to the studs move where you're in a full blown 3-4 year rebuild at that point. So I don't see the Niners going that direction. But they are, I think, in a unique position in terms of all in. I think last year was the team that I think everybody was the right age and the right part of their contract and the right motivation and had been there a couple times before and couldn't quite get over the hump, and then they just have the crushing defeat in Las Vegas in the Super Bowl, and that really makes this year an all-in kind of a year, and we've seen that with some of the moves that they've made before they have to pay Brock Purdy, obviously coming up in this next offseason. So it's interesting to me. I'm more of the I can't tell you what the proper path is right now at 3-4 in the middle of the season. I think we have to see how this thing ends for them, and I think that's going to determine whether or not the run is over, or however you want to characterize it. If they end up getting into the playoffs at 10-7, let's say they win the division at 10-7, which I think is very much still on the table.
Sure,
they win a playoff game, and then they lose a playoff game. Like they win a wild card game, they lose a divisional game. Then I think you really you have to take a hard look at that point. All right, do you keep looking to add, looking to go all in, and what does that look like? You may have to take a couple of steps back to move forward, but I don't think that's hey, the window's completely closed type of a scenario if you go that route. Now, if this thing completely falls apart and they go 7-10 and don't make the playoffs, or they go 8-9 and lose on the last day of the season, and somebody else wins the division, Seattle or the Arizona or the Rams, somebody, I wouldn't anticipate Arizona or the Rams winning it, but let's say they don't. Well, then you got to take a hard look at, maybe the window is completely closed. So I think there's a couple of different ways it can go, and if they get really hot, Larry, down the stretch, if they if they go 8-2 or something like that. 9-1 in the last 10, then I think the window at that point is very much open, depending upon how the playoffs go. So I still think there are 3 outcomes in play, and I'd be surprised, unless there's an injury to Brock, I would be surprised if this team still doesn't find a way to win the NFC West and get in as a 3 or a 4 seed at worst. And at that point, you got a great shot to win one home game, one road game, and then you're in the NFC Championship game, one step away from getting back to the Super Bowl. It's still on the table, as bleak as it sort of looks right now in the middle of the year.
I can't ever endorse the idea of trading Brock Purdy, because here's not ever. I mean, obviously everybody's got a price, but the bottom line on this thing is, you think of like, I don't know, baseball or basketball and trading a player. Well, what are you getting? You're going to get players. If you're going to trade him and you've got this veteran core, you're going to get players that are going to help you win now. And it's like, well, wait a second. Trades aren't made like that. If you were going to trade Brock Purdy, you would get picks, and that would help you in the future. So I don't understand. To me, there's no scenario where trading him makes sense. But I do think that, the 49ers are probably looking at Sam Darnold going, hey, man, we turned that guy around. We got him for nothing. He's in Minnesota looking great. I wonder if we could, Baker Mayfield was on the scrap heap, and now he's in Tampa. They look pretty good. Sam Darnold's
yeah, but you're not winning
heap.
a Super Bowl with either of those guys.
I don't think so either, but, some people might counter and say, well, you're not going to win a Super Bowl with Brock. I'm just saying I can understand why it's, you would at least think about it, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to pay Brock Purdy. Like, what would you pay Brock Purdy? I mean, what do you want to pay Brock Purdy? What do you think they could get Brock Purdy for?
I think it's going to be in the mid-50s.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean,
it's going to be it's going to be 55 plus. I mean, it's funny. We talked about this, and I know you got a jet.
Yeah.
But we talked about this a little bit in the offseason. The question of what if the Niners have a disappointing year, and Brock's numbers, I think I brought it to you, is kind of one of my wild card storylines. Maybe Brock's numbers are down a little bit. They don't win as much. They haven't paid him yet. Are we going to be having that conversation about, is he worth the $60 million price tag and all of that? I don't think we're to that point, and he's played exceptionally well, I think, up until the Chiefs game. Been some circumstances in those Cardinals and Rams games where they didn't win. Chiefs game was a bad game. It's one bad game against the best team in the league. So I think you got to afford him the opportunity to bounce back there.
No question. I mean, and ultimately, if teams play a ton of man-to-man against him and he continues to complete 40% of his passes, then that's going to change his career arc as well. And I don't expect that to happen either. I expect both that number to come up and him to start doing better even against man-to-man coverage. JD, awesome stuff, man. When are you on next? Are you on tonight?
Yeah, back tomorrow night. Dubs OT tomorrow night. Warriors in Salt Lake City, and
they
I'll
looked
be
good
on
last night.
Salt Lake City. They did.
Buddy Hield
looked good.
My Kings fans friends are like, Krug, just stop falling in love with Buddy Hield. He's going to come crashing back to earth. And I said, hey, you know what? Buddy Hield can flat out shoot it, and he can move and run the floor. He is going to be way, 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 way better on the Warriors than he was on the Kings. I'll make that prediction right now.
And again, in a lesser role, right? He's in a sixth-man role. He was a starter that they traded DeMarcus Cousins for back in the day, right? Like, he was a starter that they, a guy that they had expectations when you trade your franchise player, and he winds up being part of the deal. But, yeah, tomorrow night, Dubs OT after the Warriors take on the Jazz in Salt Lake City. I'll be live from Salt Lake City. and as we get our Dubs coverage rolling on the road here through the season. And and then I'm on after you Saturday with our debut
Nice.
program for the season of Just Dubs. I'll be on from 11 to noon after you take it from 10 to 11. So good stuff ahead, and then I'll see you out at Levi's on Friday.
Sounds good, buddy.
On Sunday. Sunday.
Thank you for the time, JD. Have a great night.
Thanks, Larry.
All right, John Dickinson.